You love Dungeons & Dragons. Now, experience the ultimate way to play. D&D Beyond. Take up the mantle of Dungeon Master to add friends to your campaign. Enable content sharing so that the entire party can access your books and content. Then, after you've noted who didn't bring snacks, unleash unspeakable terrors on them using the Encounter Builder and Combat Tracker. Ah, here we go. You never bring chips, huh, Dave? You get the gelatinous cube. Classic. D&D is for everyone. D&D Beyond makes it easy.
And welcome back to D&D Beyond. I am Amy Dallen, and I'm very much looking forward to today's topic because, as you all know, the Wild Beyond the Witchlight is coming to us on September 21st, or the 24th, if you saw the last video, and the new day I invented. So here at D&D Beyond, we are tremendously excited for that release, the new Feywild set adventure that's coming our way. But part of what makes the Wild Beyond the Witchlight intriguing is that this adventure is one that can potentially be navigated successfully with non-combat options. Most of us who play D&D have great memories of glorious or disastrous battles, but that's just one of the three pillars of combat, roleplay, and exploration that make up D&D, and they're all fertile areas for interesting challenges, problem-solving, and storytelling. So while you can always at least try to fight your way through the obstacles in your game, today we are talking about the other options, why they're fun, how to design and run them in satisfying ways, and how to approach them as a player for those times when your crossbow doesn't do the talking. And joining me today to talk about that topic is Justice Arman, a TTRPG designer and a producer and writer for Beetle and Grimms. How are you doing? Welcome to the stream.
Hello, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
I love that you were able to join us for this one because when we were talking to you about potentially coming on, I don't know if I didn't warn you that I was going to lead with this, but we had been talking a lot about wanting to cover this angle of what intrigues us about the book coming out. And it was also your suggestion of something that would be interesting. So it was just like, yes, amazing.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And, I think every DM has had that awkward moment where you're not sure if there's going to be a fight or if your players are going to talk their way out of something or if it's going to go some third direction. And so to see it committed to so heavily is really cool.
That's actually one of the things I'm most excited to get your perspective on, because I know as a DM, I have often struggled with the sort of like, how am I going to make this call of whether this is a diffusable situation? How do I make it challenging and fair and interesting and apply that over time? Is this one that you can get out of? And how do you make that call from a design perspective, in addition to just a feel at the table perspective? But as we dive into it, would you tell folks a little bit about yourself and Beetle and Grimms for those who might not be familiar?
Yeah. So my name is Justice Arman. I'm an Iranian-American D&D game designer based here in Central Texas. I'm also a producer at Beetle and Grimms, where we make awesome, fantastic box sets and other products to kind of elevate your game. So if you find a handout in the world, you can give it to your players. If you get a piece of jewelry or magic item, they can wear it, and just ways to save you a bunch of time on prep and elevate your games. And then I've also written a bunch for DM's Guild, MCDM, and D&D Adventures League. I hope that's enough.
Oh, heck yes. And I will want to take a look a little bit later on at some of the cool, shiny stuff you have forthcoming. But I will say, if you're watching this and you have never had a chance to, say, at a convention or otherwise, put your eyes on some of the beautiful, beautiful Beetle and Grimm stuff, you must. And I can see we are going to be taking some questions today. So if you have some questions for our discussion, we'll get to some of those at the end. But I can throw in one of our obligatory questions right off, which is from Mirari15. Justice, what is your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, my favorite dinosaur. I was listening to this podcast about how we study dinosaurs based off bones and how that's not even like accurate. Like if you looked at an elephant and through their bones, you would not even know they have a trunk. All of that to say, I will probably say a triceratops.
Yes.
'Cause I always
Team
love the
Trike.
pictures of triceratops fighting things, even though they are vegetarians or herbivores. I guess that's the right word. Vegetarian is much cooler, though. If you're like, "This dinosaur's a vegetarian," I feel like
You know,
that's a little bit more
I
fun.
they've chosen to just check out a different diet. We don't know. We don't know which ones. Maybe there were
Yeah.
vegetarian dinosaurs out there. Just because the teeth weren't supposed to chew things that way doesn't mean people paid attention to what their teeth wanted. I'm just saying.
Right, right.
Do not correct me, biologists. Uh, so do correct me, biologists. I do love dino facts. Um, so first off, let's just talk big picture with this. What it makes it appealing to dive into the other two pillars besides combat of D&D?
Yeah, I think, and I mentioned this a little bit before, uh, but the idea and before, I mean, before we even started talking on here, uh, but the idea that, like, so much of the player's handbook, and I've heard other designers talk about this, is so dedicated to combat, but there's this idea of these 3 pillars that you've mentioned, the social, the, exploration, and combat, and they're kind of dispersed throughout. I mean, you have so many really, really cool spells that do no damage. You have feats like the barbarian being able to talk to beasts and small creatures and stuff, all these opportunities that I feel like really set D&D apart from, like, a video game because there's so much more flexibility in it. The idea that, like, no, you don't have to fight this thing. You don't have to solve this with a set numerical combination and rolling of dice. Like, it's so open creatively, which is what really drew me into D&D in the first place, when I first tried it. Um, but no, I really enjoy those other 2 pillars. They're the ones that can kinda be hard to design for and hard to get used to when you're first, getting your feet wet as a dungeon master, but they're kind of exciting, and when you're teaching somebody how to play, you see that light bulb go off in their head where you're like, "Oh, you see this goblin or whatever, how do you want to approach it?" And they say, "Well, what do I do? How am I supposed to do it?" It's like, how do you want to approach this? The idea that some players, when they realize they can talk to a monster, it, like, changes everything for them, and that's, like, one of the best moments.
I love that. I have seen that. I love that you're sort of distilling that moment because it never occurred to me to shine a spotlight on that particular like awakening that people have where they're like, "Oh, I can really just try things." And
Yeah.
it makes you want to step up and provide what will be a satisfying experience to go with those choices. So on that note, what have you got? What advice do you have? Let's start with the social side of it for sort of social problem solving for designing that in a challenging and satisfying way.
Yeah, for sure. So I will also tell everybody here to check out some blog articles that are on your website that Sean Merwin did. They're called the Let's Design an Adventure series. Sean breaks down all kinds of aspects of adventure writing, but one of them, he talks about the 3 pillars. I think that social encounters are a little bit more familiar to people. Exploration is this weird, vague thing. Um, but when designing a social encounter, there are a few things that you should probably have in there. But at its most basic level, I go to some advice from Matt Colville, which is, what do they want and how do they get it? And I feel like if you know those 2 things about an NPC, any NPC, that can get you started. It doesn't matter if they're a dragon or a commoner or a merchant or whatever it is, if you know what they are after and how they approach that, how they get what they want, you can run any encounter and improvise that. And a lot of the time, social encounters I feel like do come out of improvisation. Um, so I think that when you're going into a social encounter and you know it's going to be a social encounter, you need to kind of prepare for it a little bit more robustly. I mean, there you can improvise things. I struggle with improvisation. I like to improvise within a box, so I have lots of bullet points under all my NPCs. Obviously, things like personality traits of the NPC. What makes them interesting. What are characters going to remember about this person? Whether you can do voices or can't do voices, the way that you describe them, how their demeanor is. Um, you need to know what their disposition is towards the characters when they approach. Um, like if there are factions involved and it's clear that one of the characters represents that faction, that might make them, more or less averse to talking to them in the first place.
Mhm.
And then I think that at its heart, and this will be a part of exploration, is what's the goal of the social encounter, and is that clear to the players? I think that a lot of the moments where you accidentally transition into combat is because either it's not clear to your players that they can talk their way out of it, or it's not clear what the goal of combat is. And everybody kind of looks around. They're like, well, I guess I'll draw my sword and fight this person because they're not easy to talk to. Um, so I would say that those are probably the most critical parts of social encounters. What Sean will tell you is that you need information, goals, threats, choices, and outcomes, and that's kind of all wrapped up into that description, I guess. And it's not always clear, and a lot of these things come up organically as you're talking with an NPC. If you know what they want, you have your goal, you have their threats to it. If they don't want to reveal this information, um, and then of course there's always this slight subtle interaction of things like spells and abilities that can help influence social conversations. You have spells like charm person, or you have, I mean, players can make checks, and making it clear when a player prompts those, I think, is also a big part of DMing a social encounter.
Do you have a go-to for
I've had
signaling this is a good time to make a check, or is it just something that evolves with your players?
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's sort of ambiguous at times, but usually I will call for a check when a player, either one, when a player says something that I have written down explicitly as, this is the way to influence this person. If you're trying to persuade someone to let you into this exclusive club, and you maybe drop somebody's name who's at the club, or you reference something that this NPC cares about, I think those are great times to make, you know, persuasion or deception checks or whatever. Um, but I think oftentimes what we have in our heads is not what the players do, and that's not a bad thing. That's the beauty of Dungeons and
Mhm.
Dragons, is that they're going to throw out something that you've never written down, that you're not prepared for. And I have heard of people who, when they design a puzzle, they have an answer to a puzzle, and then they also leave this just back door open. They say, and this is probably a peek, too much of a peek behind the curtain, but I know that most of my players at work right now, it's if they say something that sounds like a satisfying solution, that sounds reasonable, like, be open to it. If if their persuasion is really good, it might not be what you have written down, but let them make the check, lean into it, give them advantage. If it convinces you as a dungeon master, it probably would convince the NPC.
I love that. All right, so on that puzzle side, that leaving a back door open, we think about exploration challenges often in terms of puzzles, but that also applies
Mm,
to travel problems, to information getting problems, which can be some of the most fun, but also very tricky to design for. Because if you leave beautiful
yeah.
caches out and your players just don't think to go to the library, you're usually scrambling to drop those documents somewhere else, and you want to make sure that a challenge should feel satisfying to overcome, and that can be tough to be like to make it feel triumphant that you got
Mhm.
through this need for information or this puzzle. How do you approach the exploration and puzzle parts?
Yeah, yeah. I think, going to the library is so interesting because it's like it's such a practical thing. It's like we should go to the library, and I think when players figure out they can go to the library, like, things change. You have to make smaller libraries because you're like, they're just going to the library for everything, which that's a really good idea, and it's a good principle for life in general. But we got to find something else here. I think that I mean, interaction is a pretty critical part of exploration that I think about, that I think when we talk about exploration, we think about exploring, and the word explore is into it. When you think of exploration, you think of dungeons, you think of wilderness, you think of Indiana Jones, moving through. But exploration is also like interaction. It's like there's a there's a room in one of the old modules against the giants. I think it's the second one where you're in the hall of the giant king, and there's this hidden area, and in there's like an altar, and it has nothing to do with the plot, has nothing to do with the adventure, but it's this cool thing in there that's very D&D that when you interact with it, you get this stimulus back. And that moment from a player is like, I want to keep tinkering with this. I want to have more fun with this weird altar. I want to see what happens. Let's be curious about it. And I think indulging that curiosity and having things happen when you interact with something is a big part of exploration. So if you go back to the puzzle, there's like math puzzles where you can put it in front of your players and they can like solve and draw it out and stuff. But I think like complex traps are much more interesting puzzles where there's some danger involved with them. Yes, that blade will swing out, but it swings out under certain conditions and it gets worse if you do certain things or better if you do other things. And so I think when designing for exploration, and especially designing for, I mean, similarly to social encounters, I guess too, is not making everything binary. Is a locked door is boring. I mean, it's great when you succeed on the thieves tool check, but the idea that when you mess up or succeed, something else happens that doesn't necessarily end it right there. So that way, after you've done 3 or 4 checks, or you've seen this puzzle get gradually more complex, or you've slowly moved through this wall of traps that is standing between you and your goal, that your players feel like more than one person got a turn at it. They got to weigh in, they got to discuss it. 2, it's going to save you time on prep because it's going to take longer. And then 3, it's just more interesting because they'll remember it. They're not going to remember the one time a pendulum swung in front of a door. I mean, unless it kills one of them. But they'll remember the door that had 7 pendulums and a mouth on the front that told pendulum puns or something.
I love
I hope
that.
that
I
answers
also
your question.
very much so. My own background, like I love comparing the things you can do in TTRPGs to things like computer games because it reminds you of some of the sort of the basic things that set TTRPGs apart, which are all
Mhm.
amazing opportunities to play with stuff. So, like every RPG is a game where the answer to can I pet the dog is yes, or you can certainly try. Like, it's
Yeah,
always and I
always
love
pet the
that
dog.
open. Yeah, well, that's the correct answer. But I usually try not to tell people how to play, but some things are absolutes. Um but I also like I'm an old school adventure gamer for video games, and that's very much trains you to be like I want to try every object. I want to combine everything. I want to find a way through
Mhm.
and sort of designing things that will be satisfying that way with this theoretically infinite field of in-world options is I love like aligns closely with what you're saying. Some of my favorite memories from that style of game design are things where it's like a door that's tough to get through that does talk to you or speak poetry or
Yeah.
expect you to remember a riddle from earlier in the game. And it's all game design is game design, I guess, is all we're really saying. But I love the examples you've chosen. I have a
Yeah, I mean,
question
building
about
on stuff from earlier,
yeah, yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
is super interesting. Like all the Legend of Zelda games, the idea, like I thinking back on those games, the idea that it gives you something early in or midway through the dungeon that helps you throughout is a super cool design. And we need more of that. Like give your characters the wind fan in a wind temple and let them do wind things with it. Like it's so cool.
I love that. I also I want to ask about something you were saying earlier, which is that it can be if you have a locked door, your thief gets to do stuff, but other people might not. And
Yeah.
if you have no locked doors, your thief may not feel special or like they got to do the thing that makes them the thief. But if you only have
Yeah.
locked doors, then everyone else is just waiting for the thief to guide them through this thing. So how do you balance? And this could apply to social as well. If you have a character who takes on like a face role, how do you design for situations where one of the player characters is going to be much better at something, but you would like
Mhm.
everyone to be involved without flattening out what makes that character special? Does that make sense? In game, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think it's different for writing than it is for DMing. I would say to every DM that like make reviewing your players' character sheets like a part of your prep. You can find obscure things that they don't use very often on there that you can really help them shine during. And if you're saying, "Oh my gosh, I need to build a really cool door puzzle," or "I need to make some, pivotal moment," and you have your 4 or 5 character sheets or 7 or 10 if you're a masochist in front of you, you can see what they do best and put opportunities in there that really speak to it. So if you have a character who, like, their character took a history proficiency and there's something in the world that you want to invoke on there, you could have the relief of the door be from a moment in history that, sure, maybe the rogue inquisitive is the one who's going to be able to understand the trap. They might not know the context of it, and that
Mm,
history character can give it to them. And I'm kind of the philosophy that, not everybody can make every check. Like if it's reasonable for somebody to attempt it, like pushing on a door or something, that's fine. But if it relies on something specific to that character, like that's a moment for that person to shine. And putting those character sheets out every time that you start to write, you will thank yourself later because your players might not realize it, but those moments are for them and they will remember them because all that work they put into making that cool character, every choice that they made that they thought about and, looked up these certain spells that maybe, like, if you have a plant growth spell, put an arboretum somewhere, like, because there's not enough plants in D&D, like, put more plants in there for your nature cleric, whatever you need to do, but, like, that's the cool thing, you can build the game around them and they'll
mm.
love you for it.
So on the other side, let's say you're using a published adventure or something else, and
Mhm.
you're just in game trying to make sure everybody stays involved. Do you have any tips or tricks?
We're running a published adventure, and I'm okay, sorry, I was repeating your question to make sure I understood. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So say we're running like Storm King's Thunder, you mean? And yeah, yeah. I think not being always exactly beholden to the text is one.
Mm,
That sure, everything there might be written a certain way, but you don't have to necessarily follow that. But two is prompting the characters in ways like if you're running a social encounter, like have an NPC ask their character specifically what they think of it. You might have a bard talking to a soldier, but the soldiers, they're probably gonna be like, here's that guy from The Witcher that sings. I don't wanna talk to this person, no matter how persuasive they are. It's like, I wanna talk to the fighter over there who wears this coat of arms on their shoulders, like, and you can prompt that character and have the NPC say like, "What do you think about this? You're a soldier," and you kinda draw that character in, and the player with them. And then for puzzles is a little bit harder.
mm.
But same sort of thing, but unless you have a talking
And
door, you probably can't have it talk.
yeah, and you can, of course, you can rely on your party. Usually, will try to keep each other involved or hype up
Mhm.
whoever's doing the mechanically difficult part right now. Hmm?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's see. Oh, Laura Ermejo, I think is what your this name is. Sorry if I'm getting that wrong. How do you manage game time during puzzles?
It depends on how, it depends on my goals as a dungeon master, like what I wanna get done. There are some times where we've been running a section of a published adventure for a long time, and I wanna go ahead and get them going because when I first played D&D, it took us, I wanna say 2 semesters of college or something to reach, like, level 5, maybe 3 semesters, I can't remember now, and that was super slow. That was a long time to spend at, like, level
It's a
3, and
pretty slow burn. Yeah.
it was a super slow burn. So I'm always thinking that my players should level up. I use milestone. I'm like, they should level up every 3 to 5 sessions after around level 3 or 4. So, managing game time, I will put little notes on about how long I think something should take. If you read an Adventures League module, you'll see that they have estimated durations for each part. And I try to think of a trap or a puzzle or a social encounter as one scene. And if my session consists of 2 scenes, I know that that needs to take between 1 and 1.5 hours so that we have time to break for coffee and snacks. Um,
Hmm.
so, and then managing time during it, it never hurts to check in and to take a beat and ask your players out of character. Does everybody understand this? Like, is it clear what's happening right now? Do you need me to repeat anything? Because I know there's sometimes a tendency to like say, oh, if your players didn't write it down, then you know, then they don't know it. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
but their characters are like 30 years old and have spent their lives learning magic. I'm pretty sure they're better note takers than me, a sophomore in college who's got biology in the morning. Like, so it's fine to pause and check in. And I wrote a blog article on my website called "Take a Beat to Avoid a Beating" because we were running Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and it was really we were unsure whether or not they should fight this person. And we had a combat encounter, and I could tell they were super like they weren't super, but they were like demoralized over it. And if I had just stopped the session then and said, you know, you all have tried this and this person is looking not super happy with you right now, maybe try something else, then we could have saved that session. So
Mm.
it never hurts to just take a break, pause for a second, and check in with your players. Or even one thing my wife will do a lot in her games is re-summarize the options at hand. So I think a lot of players, they get really wrapped up in planning something, and so Sam will stop and say, so far we've had these 3 options, go through the door, talk to this person, slay the whatever, and summarizing that back to them will help kind of speed things along.
Hmm. I love that. Focus the group in on the sort of like, all right, we've narrowed the field of infinite options into some major ones, so let's move forward with the decision making. Hmm.
Right. And you can
Um, uh,
strategically leave an option out when doing that.
do how do you decide, for instance, if a social situation should be like when somebody tries to befriend someone that you had assumed they were going to fight? How do you decide on the fly, like maybe that will work, or what DC to put on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will go back to the what does the character want and how do they
Hmm.
get it. If the character has a reason, like if this NPC has a reason for befriending them, or acting as a potential ally, I can rationalize that, and I can have the NPC say something like, "Fine, I'm coming with you, but I don't trust you." And I think that conveys to the players that okay, this is a tenuous allyship here, like, we should be careful. This could turn into a fight later, or we could win this person over, which is what they always think. They always think they can win them over. Um, and yeah, and then just, always like know that the second that you roll initiative, you shift your players into a combat mindset. It's like if you want them to have the opportunity to role play with somebody, don't start by when they kick the door up and rolling initiative. Start with
Hmm.
words, or describe the scene and let them react because once they have an initiative value, they're thinking, they look down at their character sheets, they look at the attack options they have, and it's awkward to go out of that because then when you start talking in character on your turn and it's turn based, you're like, I only have 6 seconds. How much can I exactly talk during this time? Like it gets weird.
And I've seen versions where that works and versions where it would be cleaner if we all sort of agreed that that's our signal that we're in this mode. And it really can be a case by case thing. But I think it's great advice to sort of pay attention to the signal that you're sending by moving into that mode. And sort of
Mhm.
barring a very extreme circumstance, like one person arrives late to the fight with key information and everybody can kind of tell that this might be an inflection point. That might be a suitable time to sort of pause for a moment to see how it plays out before you get back into it. But I think paying attention to that, it's an organizing tool for our decision making that often means, all right, we're done with the talking part. Now is the swords part. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
making that cutoff really clear is important. I like that you said modes because I feel like saying, okay, like you're in like it is role play mode. You can feel free to talk and ask questions, but the times where I've tried to switch back to role play mode during combat, if somebody's later in the initiative, they're like, "What? That person got to cast Eldritch Blast. My turn came after them because I have a low dex, and now I don't get to do anything because that person wants to talk them down." Like they're like, "No, I want to throw a fireball at them. I want to use my character's cool stuff."
Yeah.
And then it's hard to shift out of it.
That does speak to an interesting problem of sort of applying these, which is how do you handle it when your party is not unified in what approach they want to take? One person wants to kill everything they see, and one person wants to befriend everything they see.
Yeah, I think f- first, like the session zero is so important. Like if you're running Witchlight, you need to talk about what that book is and the spirit of that book, and make sure people's characters are built to succeed in that. Whereas if you're running Dungeon of the Mad Mage, you probably don't want to bring a role play heavy character. You can, but at some point you're going to be on a level where there's like 20 fire giants all ready to smash you with their hammers, and you don't speak giant. Like, um, so I think going back, like that's pretty critical, is to make sure that your party has some alignment there. But also, like, I think very basically some things like taking a vote when you need to, and explaining to the character that, like, oh, like 4 out of 5 people, I feel like 4 to 5 dentists, 4 to 5 characters agree that they don't want to fight this person right now, and your character like can't override the group. I think is fine to say. Because the goal of that session is going to be preserving the most fun, and you can find ways to give that character time to vent outside. But if it's a pretty even split, I mean that's a DM call. I feel like I would lean towards probably what you have planned at that point if it's one of those
Mm,
two,
mhm.
or having the players hash it out and say, look, y'all need to decide, because if half of you attack this person and half of you want to talk to this person, some of y'all will probably be upset. And that's another time to just pause the game for a second, go take a break, put some snacks out. I love snacks. I talk about snacks a lot because we're a very snacky group. Um, but yeah, it's challenging, and there are those situations, and that's one of the beauty, but the difficulties of just being a dungeon master is in a world where nothing is binary. There are some gray areas, and you'll have to make calls, and you'll wonder about them weeks later. You'll come out of a bad session and you'll go, oh, I messed up, I'm a terrible dungeon master, they hate me. And then the next week you'll be like, that was the best session ever, I can ride this high for a month. Like, and that's what being a GM is.
I love that. So let's see. I have a great question. This one leans sort of on the player side. Lumi Dark asks, "What's your favorite example of a non-combat solution to a problem from a game you played?"
Ooh, a non-combat solution to a problem from a game that I've played. I'm trying to not spoiler because we do run some. We run a lot of the published adventures. Um, oh gosh, that's a hard question. My players love killing things. There was one that stands out to me, I think, is the strangest use of divine intervention. Not strangest, but one of my favorite ones was they were in this super like icy dungeon. There was a door puzzle that was in my eyes, it was fairly easy, and they started solving it for like 2 minutes, and my wife was playing a dwarven tempest cleric, and she's like, I'm gonna divine intervention, and like the boss is like 2 levels up. They are not very far in this dungeon, and, like, the solution, I think it was a riddle that the answer was icicle or something, like, and she used divine intervention. This angel she rolls, of course, she gets below the certain level. This angel comes down, and he was like, "Pray tell, what would you have me do for you today? I will stand by your side in the name of Martha," and he's got, like, a golden mace, and she's like, "Can you open this door for me?" Like, and, he's like, "I'm pretty sure the answer is icicle, but I can just, like, unlock it for you if you'd like." And that was yeah, I mean, that was a solution that was definitely not what I expected. But it became a meme, and she basically, like, she would use her divine intervention for, like, very minor things, and it was the same angel every time. He's like, "Please tell me you have something for me to do today." But I think there were some fewer hags around that time, and I think they waited them out instead of just fighting them and asking the password or something. I think they waited till they went through the door, didn't quite hear what they said, and then used divine intervention. So, when in doubt, pray for it, and your God will come open the door.
Well, I love that because you responded by like letting that successful role work and have an effect, but investing in something that would pay off long term in terms of the relationship to this angel character, and
Oh, yeah.
letting that be like, look, you still succeeded in getting through this door. You didn't do it the way that I had planned, but like I love that's a great example.
Yeah, my wife, she runs a Tuesday night ladies group, and I think when they discovered they could talk their way out of combat encounters, they did it for months, and she would get frustrated because she would design these combat encounters, and she wanted them to fight, and they would talk to the dragon, and eventually she's like, "You can't talk to this dragon. You gotta fight this dragon." Just because, yeah, like, you can, and, there are games like I remember playing, Metal Gear Solid 3, and you can go through that whole game and use tranquilizers, and you don't have to kill anybody, and it rewards you when you do. You get like a something that can turn you invisible or something, and there's such a satisfaction in that, to like be the adventurer that doesn't shed blood when they don't have to. um, so it's cool. I like it.
Because it's still about challenges and overcoming obstacles, and
Yeah,
it's not necessarily an easier path, it's just a different way to approach it, which is what I love
for
about
sure.
the idea. And I love that. So let's see, please let me know,
I mean,
folks,
and
keep
there's
sending those questions. Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of good lore, I think, in the monster manual to guide you in how a monster might act outside of combat. You'll probably want to look at the newer monsters to Dungeons and Dragons. I did a back in 2020, I did a Monster Monday thing, and one thing I learned was that a lot of the early monsters in D&D are ambush predators. So there's lots of things that are designed to drop down and attack you. Sturges, they fly out, they want to suck your blood. There are those things that fall, they look like stalactites. Ropers, they camouflage and then they grab you and try to eat you. So lots of things want to surprise and eat you. But if you look at the newer monsters, kind of like second and third edition on, or monsters that have gotten a bit of a facelift since first edition, you'll find that there's a lot of good material in there for role play. Balo's Guide to Monsters is one of my favorite books, arguably my favorite non-core book in 5e. They have great information on hags and beholders and mind flayers, all of these creatures that are so fearsome, but that can be really interesting role play opportunities. You have like the Xanathar in Waterdeep, who is very eccentric, and yeah, it can disintegrate you, but it also probably is something that you could probably talk to. And a giant makes a really cool role play scenario because giants are huge. And when they talk, it's like a gust of wind that will, blow your hair back and leaves will fly off the trees. So there's just so much potential in, not just fighting these creatures. And the idea of also potentially, when you befriend a creature or make that kind of temporary alliance, that pays off later in your game, because when they're
Mm.
fighting something bigger that they can't talk to, they might go back to that giant or back to the hag coven and say, "Hey, I know we had that weird thing a few months ago. It looked like we were going to kill each other for a second there, but I kind of need your help. And then your players get to, fight a bigger monster with, you know, old villains basically. And that's like the coolest trope ever, is teaming up with the villain.
Yeah, it's there's a greater threat. We almost answered the call. I'm a comic book
Right.
person, so I will never get tired of that. Uh,
Right.
but it works for a reason because it also means that those earlier stories mattered and they resonate forward through the adventure in a way that just reinforces everything that has come before. So I am very excited to put some of these ideas to practice when we all have Wild Beyond the Witchlight available to us. And of course, you can pre-order that right now on D&D Beyond. But if you also want some shiny versions, Justice, would you tell us a little bit about the Beetle and Grimms offerings for Witchlight?
Yeah, of course. So we are doing for the first time a uh, release at the same time of both a platinum and a silver version. Um, if you check out our Instagram page, they did a really cool breakdown of the difference between these two kind of boxes recently. Um, but it's going to be just a really awesome box. Yeah, you can see the concept there. We're focusing kind of on these other two pillars in this box, which means you're going to have a lot more handouts. There's going to be some really cool role play elements. We have a plushie of a fairy dragon named Sir Talavar, who is featured somewhere in the book. And there are lots of things that your players will love, that they can, some things that they can wear, some things that they can exchange. I mean, there's if you all followed any of the D&D live stuff, you'll know that there's a carnival in the adventure. And so we designed some tickets, and these are tickets you can give to your players and give them that Willy Wonka-esque moment. And they have little spots so that if you go on carnival rides, you can punch them out and redeem them. And just a lot of awesome, whimsical adventure. We write bonus encounters for each of these boxes that we do. And it's been a welcome challenge to lean into that non combat encounter angle, which we've done in all three of them. So, yeah, definitely check it out. We're going to be at Gen Con next week. I know that, things are still a little wild. Here, not beyond the Witchlight in the real world. So we'll be there for all 4 days. We're going to be running a promotion both in person and online, where if you buy 2 boxes, you get 10% off. And we might be selling some fairy-esque apparel, including T-shirts, but maybe something else, maybe something wearable that you might see on a fairy. Um, and and I didn't even mention, yeah, these cool wanted posters for a character in the adventure that they showed off. We're gonna have many of these wanted posters in that box, and you can post them all around your living room if you'd like.
Oh, what
But
a good idea!
I
I
hope
never
that I
thought
said
to
enough.
hang like a custom like other than beautiful art and maps. I had not thought through as a theater person. I now feel remiss in the idea that you could just like poster your walls with appropriate thematic things as you're getting into an adventure. I love that. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and we also have this T-shirt. The T-shirt has these uh, excellent fairy wings on the back of it, so you can go around and show off your witchlight uh, uh, style. I don't know what the word is, but but yeah, it's a really great box. One thing that I love about fifth edition has just been how wildly different each book is in terms of what they tackle with it. You had a hex crawl, you have a dungeon crawl, you have an investigation adventure, a heist, and now this idea of finally going into the Feywild, and also just emphasizing different ways of solving problems. There are so many cool spells in D&D, and this is the adventure that as your first level sorcerer, you don't need to take mage armor and you don't need to take shield. So go take one of those weird spells that you've always wanted to take but never had the space for.
I love the idea of encouraging in that direction. And of course, there's no one way to run an adventure. So I would not
Mhm.
go totally undefended because one never knows exactly.
That's true, that's true. You might
Things
get
could go
curb
in,
stomped by a herringon.
or curb hopped, I guess, would be the.
I Paul, our founder, said herb stomped or herb stomped, I guess.
It's like an
Whatever.
herbivore getting you. That's amazing.
Yeah, full circle. It's full circle.
So the vegetarian dangers of the Feywild, or the non-vegetarian ones, coming for you soon in the Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Justice, where can people find you or find more info on this?
Well, if you'd like to look for me, I'm easy to find. My Twitter handle is at Justice Arman on Twitter. However you Google Twitter. I also have a website that is just my name, www.justicearmand.com. My Instagram, some very patriotic person named Armand took that from me, so I'm something else there. And you can find this box on our website, beetleandgrimms.com. You can pre-order it now, and if you pre-order our platinum edition, you'll get a D&D Beyond code, and that should be being dispersed soon, so you can get those awesome pre-order goodies. I love D&D Beyond. I use D&D Beyond on my little laptop at my table every weekend. So
I love that.
that's that.
I am also a I live here now, but lived here before. It turns out it's just very useful.
It
Um,
is very
so
useful.
yeah, thank you so much for joining me today, Justice. Any final thoughts that we didn't get to on the subject of these other two pillars and how to make them fun?
Hmm. I don't think so. Just have fun with it. Get a little whimsical, get a little weird. That's what D&D is for, and you'll have a good time.
Perfect final words. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time on D&D Beyond.
Thank you.
It's D&D.